Okay. So as I said, welcome. Just as a brief introduction, my name is Sarah Schmitz, and I'm your professional learning specialist here with Rosetta Stone. My background really is in teaching ELA and social studies, both in Houston, Texas, where my hometown, where I'm based out of, and in Seoul, South Korea. The most important piece of information you really need about me is down here below, and that's my email, my contact. So sarahs@rosettastone.com is going to be the best way to reach me if you ever have any questions at all about Rosetta Stone implementation, and I want to make sure that I'm a resource here for all of you. I always like to start out sessions with this big picture question here. What is Rosetta Stone Foundations? So Rosetta Stone Foundations is a language learning program that aims to change lives through the power of language and literacy education. Our lessons are really designed to celebrate your students' achievement at every step of the way. And we do believe that every person can learn to speak, listen, read, and write with confidence using Rosetta Stone. For today's session, here's kind of the agenda. We will begin by taking a look at the student experience on the program, and we'll explore the curriculum and those activities that will help your students in their language learning. Then next, we'll pivot and we'll look at the teacher or the administrator experience. So for this, I'll share some tips for how to effectively implement Rosetta Stone in your classroom in order to support your language learning objectives. We'll also talk about how to access different reports to make sure your students are getting the most out of Rosetta Stone. And we'll take a look at some helpful teacher resources too. Finally, at the very end, once you're familiar with the student and the teacher experience, we'll explore some overall best practices for setting your students up for success. And I know that this is a virtual session, of course, today, but we can be as interactive as possible. So I will be stopping for questions periodically throughout, and feel free to put your questions in the chat box as well. Now, the way that the program really approaches learning and teaching language is through something called structured immersion. This is similar to something you're probably already familiar with, total immersion. When you're in a place where you don't know the language, but you're surrounded by it, you're in total immersion. Just for a second, I want you all to imagine that you've been dropped into the location you see here in this picture. If you don't speak this language, Japanese, it may be very hard to make sense of what you see without having any clue to the translation, right? But once you start to look at the letters and the characters along with the images you see near them, you can begin to make some educated guesses about what you see. Now, with structured immersion, we're keeping students in that same immersive environment for very intense language development, but we're always structuring it so that the student is only exposed to a limited amount at a time. Rosetta Stone uses our reliance on our visual sense of understanding the world to start learning that new language. And Foundation's structured immersion experience will introduce each new vocabulary or grammar concept to be paired with an image to help convey the meaning. And it'll provide scaffolded content, including sounds, images, and text, which just helps students to get a lot of practice in the language and quickly develop those language skills for successful use in everyday conversations. So with that being said, let's begin with that student experience. So your students will sign into Rosetta Stone by your campus's custom URL, which is down here. This is the same custom URL that teachers and administrators will use as well. So if you want to take a moment to write this link down or take a screenshot or take a picture, feel free to do so. I'll just wait a minute. And I definitely recommend, once you do have this link, that you bookmark it or you save it onto your device, or recommend your students bookmark it and save it onto their devices as well. But once you click into that sign in link, you'll get to a sign in screen that looks like this for the student to put in their credentials. And the student will begin by clicking where it says Launch Rosetta Stone Foundations. And once the program is launched here, students are going to be presented with their recommended lesson or where they last left off here. I've, of course, been in this program many times, so it's showing me Unit 5, Lesson 1. If a student was just totally signing in for the very first time, it would show them to Unit 1, Lesson 1, which is right here. Looks like this. And when students sign in, they can see that there are 4 lessons in every single unit, and that each of these lessons begin with a core lesson activity at the top, and then is followed by a variety of focused activities underneath. These activities are all of the supporting skills of language. So things like speaking, pronunciation, reading, grammar, vocab, writing, all of that good stuff. The core lesson at the top is what's really introducing the key vocabulary and grammar concepts for the remainder of the activities. So because of that, I recommend, especially when your students are working independently, that they complete those core lessons first and then do the additional activities after. I say that as well because the activities are always going to be scaffolded to build upon previous ideas that were taught in previous lessons. But let's begin by taking a look at that student experience for the core lesson here in Unit 1, Lesson 1. And you'll see that this is really designed for students who are just being introduced to the language here. And before starting practice, students are asked to complete a mic check here. All they need to do is click begin and count from 1 to 5 in any language. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This calibrates their audio input and just prepares the system for the included speaking and pronunciation questions. Students are going to experience a variety of different question types on Rosetta Stone. So for audio input questions like this one will be, students will see a black box appear with a microphone icon. They'll hear a native speaker say the prompt, followed by a sound. And then after they hear that sound, they should repeat or respond. But I'll show you what that looks like.
Hello.
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 And I received this immediate automatic feedback over here. A fully or almost fully complete green circle indicates my pronunciation was perfect or near perfect here.
A girl. A boy. A girl. A boy.
The girl is eating. The girl is drinking. The boy is drinking.
I can also replay these audio prompts at any time by clicking the play button.
The boy is drinking.
You'll notice as well when I hover my mouse over, a tiny magnifying glass icon appears. So clicking on this icon allows me to enlarge the text. Same for the images. I can enlarge the image if I ever wanted a little bit more detail here.
The boy is eating.
If I'm incorrect here, I want to show you what this feedback would look like.
The boy is eating. The boy is eating.
So of course, if the student answers a question like this incorrectly, they see a red X and they're prompted and encouraged to try again. I want to show you again different types of feedback that we could see.
A girl.
A girl.
A girl. A boy.
A boo. A buh. A boy.
A boy.
Right. So the first two times, of course, I was incorrect in my pronunciation of a boy. And if you were able to see, I know it was fast, but I received the feedback where I got two partially complete red circles. Again, this is the way the program is communicating to me that I need to try again. And it's encouraging me to fix and change my pronunciation here.
The girl is drinking.
The girl is drinking.
The girl is drinking. The boy is drinking.
The boy is drinking.
The boy is drinking.
So speaking with this kind of purposeful repetition and listening practice is really a key attribute of Rosetta Stone. And the embedded speech recognition engine will always be providing this immediate feedback for them. And it's helping to guide their pronunciation without judging, while the educator can monitor student progress. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. So let's imagine that I'm the student and I've answered through all these questions and now I've made it to here. So as students progress through these questions, the program is introducing and scaffolding in new vocabulary for them. So for example, in this question here, the lesson is introducing the vocab word run by showing different people running.
The man is running. The boy is running. The girl is running. The woman is running.
And you'll notice as well that the image cards are scrambling automatically, right? So I can't just memorize where to click, but I have to really be paying attention to that meaning and to that context. Let's imagine further that I've answered through even more questions and I've progressed now to question 22. So additional grammar topics are also embedded as part of that structured immersion model. So in this question here, instead of just saying the boy is, the girl is, now we're being introduced to using the pronouns for he and she.
She is drinking. She is reading. He is eating. He is running.
And if I had made my way almost to the very end here, towards the very end, we've increased the rigor to the point where the student will review 3 phrases heard in the lesson, and then they must produce that 4th phrase independently.
She is drinking. She is eating. He is drinking.
He is eating.
He is eating.
Right. So the new vocabulary and grammar concepts here allow students to gain confidence with using more complex sentence structures and just deepens that immersive experience for them so they can build their comprehension and competency in a very natural way. In other words, your students will always start with a simple vocab word or grammatical term and then expand on that by moving gradually to using variations of the same term or introducing similar terms in the same category. Then that new vocabulary and grammar are scaffolded together into simple phrases. And finally, we'll progress into useful, more complex sentences for them. Returning back to our activity demo. So students can track their progress in the lesson using these gray circles across the bottom of the page. Again, the green checks indicate that they have correctly answered the minimum number of prompts and can continue. The X indicates that they have not answered enough prompts correctly and that they may choose to return later to the activity and review or retry that question. So while your students are working in Rosetta Stone, you can move around the classroom and glance at the progress bar on each of your students' screens. So if you notice a student has multiple X's, for example, you could stop to offer them some support or ask them to click back to those questions to identify different intervention opportunities. Additionally, Let's say you notice trends where multiple students are getting the same questions wrong. You then can use that as some data to plan opportunities for whole class or small group reteaching. Additionally, as you were able to see, I could click forward or click back using the gray circles here on my progress bar. So I can skip a question and come back to it later. Students can also check their progress at any time by hovering over these three dots here in the bottom right hand. So this shows them their score and breaks down the correct and incorrect answers. Finally, if students ever step away from the program at any time, I would remind them just to click on the little pause button over here in the bottom left-hand corner. And as we just saw, students will experience different types of questions as we practice in Rosetta Stone. So giving students these different opportunities to listen, speak, write, and synthesize in a variety of different modalities is again another key attribute of the program. So here's the breakdown of the questions. First and foremost, they'll have to choose an image. So students will see and hear a prompt, then choose that corresponding picture. Some questions will ask them to vice versa, choose the prompt. So they'll see an image and choose that appropriate matching prompt. For the speaking practice questions, students will see and hear a word, phrase, or sentence, and then they would practice repeating it themselves. And then we increase the rigor with the speaking. So for some questions, students would need to produce a new word or phrase that fits that context independently. We also have questions where students would need to pronounce the syllables of a new word, especially. So just to develop that phonological awareness. And we also have multiple choice. Keep in mind, this is not the traditional A, B, C, D multiple choice. If you can see from my example here, the student would have to select the dog is not or the dog is running. So these two would be the multiple choices. And then last but not least, we have writing practice questions. So for these, students would be typing out words or phrases. They could be practicing new letters or accent marks, and where applicable, they could be experiencing a new keyboard layout. So the variety of questions here just serves to keep your students engaged and motivated at just the right level. Research actually shows that having this variety and the amount of language input and its frequency are highly relevant for the acquisition of any new language. So the 7 different types of questions will all add value in their own way. Now, upon completion of any activity in the program, students will see one of 3 messages depending on how they performed. So the first option is they could see a screen that says congratulations. After finishing an activity, students will see this screen if they have been successful. And from here, they can choose to continue, or if they want, they can review and go back. The second option is almost done. So if a student skipped over any questions, they'll see this screen here. It'll say almost done, and if they received a high enough score to pass, the circle will be green. If they skipped over questions, but their score was not high enough to pass, then it'll be red, and it reminds them that they need to go back and complete the questions they skipped over. And the final option is you could see a screen that says need a little more practice. So if the student did not answer the minimum number of questions correctly, they'll see this screen with an orange circle that just shows they need a little bit more practice here. And from here, they're able to click on review or click continue if they want to move forward. I recommend advising students in this instance to go back and review the activity in order to achieve that minimum proficiency score, however. Speaking of minimum proficiency scores, so when students are viewing their main lesson page, the students are also able to see their individual scores for each activity, if they're in progress, and also if they have passed that activity. We have 3 different passing score requirements based on the rigor of the activity. So if you look at the bottom, for the core lesson and reviews, students would need to reach at least an 85%. For more rigorous activities that require language production, like speaking, writing, pronunciation, students need a 75%. And then for all else, students need a 90%. But don't worry, you and your students do not need to memorize those figures. It'll always have on the screen for them if it needs them to get a higher score in order to pass. So in my example image here, you can see that for my grammar lesson activity, it says I received an 85%, but I need a 90 in order to pass. And so now the button over here that used to say start, now it says try again. Yes, it's a really helpful feature for students to be able to see their progress and to know exactly, from the outside looking in, how they're doing so far. Oop, there we go. So in our core lesson demo that we were just looking at, I showed you a preview of how many of the different question types work, including speech recognition and identification of different words and phrases. But one thing I haven't shown you yet is what it looks like when students are in a writing activity. So I like to make sure I get to show that. I'm going to click back on the Home tab up here in the left to go to my main learner menu. And I'm going to jump into this writing activity just for an example. When students first encounter a writing question, they're given this keyboard introduction prompt. There's nothing they need to click here or do here. This is just giving some additional guidance on how to use the virtual on-screen keyboard for them.
Swimming, swimming.
And when students first start out with writing activities, they'll hear and see the words that they're expected to write. So again, just as before, I can repeat the audio.
Swimming.
I can enlarge the text. I can enlarge my image. You'll notice that I have a virtual on-screen keyboard here as well. So I can click onto the keys here if I want to, or I could just use the keyboard that's attached to my device, of course.
Running, running.
I want to show you what this feedback could look like if I totally misspelled the word. So I got the X, but you'll see it's also sort of giving a hint of what part of the word it wants the student to change. And it will stick with them and encourage them to try again until eventually they're correct. I like to also kind of remind everyone that, this looks very easy right now because we're just beginning at Unit 1, right? But we're always going to be increasing that rigor for students. So as we move up into more rigorous units and levels, students will eventually have to listen to and write complete sentences without seeing the text over here on the left side. Eventually, they'll even be answering questions while producing their own language as well. Additionally, so while your students are becoming more familiar with the alphabet and depending on their home language, they could be relearning kind of new sets of sounds as well. I like to highlight that we provide this tool for all of our students. It's on every page of the student experience. They just need to click on their name and click alphabet. But this is our alphabet tool that we provide embedded into the program. The alphabet tool is a really great way for students to hear what each letter name sounds like.
A.
Right. And to also hear many different examples of all the sounds this letter can make in different words.
Apple. Father.
Right. Teachers can make use of this alphabet tool to front load letter names and sounds, especially if there are some new characters here that are not a part of your student's native language, right? And there's a lot of ways that teachers choose to use these in the class. So when I was using this with my students, one thing that I would always do was I used to pair my students up to do a speaking activity that we called an alphabet challenge, right? So I used to have students take turns speaking the letters of the alphabet in order. Then if one made a mistake, they'd stop, listen to the letter name and sound using the alphabet tool, and then they'd start over at the beginning. So that was a way that we made this interactive and a teamwork-based challenge to encourage them to develop their confidence with using the new alphabet here. For your total beginner learners, I recommend having students practice producing letter sounds, starting with vowels, and then continuing from there to any consonants or combination sounds that would be new to them. There we go. I want to kind of just take one final moment then to review all of the different activity types your students will encounter on Rosetta Stone. Typically, the core lesson will take anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes to complete, and each of the focused activities that follow will take 3 to 10 minutes to complete. Remember, we did a demo of the core lesson, and we also reviewed a writing activity. Each lesson will also come with an accompanying review activity as well. So the reviews are a mixture of different question types and will spiral back to material that we've already learned in previous activities just for reinforcement. And then the final kind of option of the student experience is the milestone. So the milestone is a summative activity that brings that structured immersion model to the next level. It's kind of a real life conversation that's been pre-recorded with a native speaker. It puts the student in a situation where they'll need to answer questions, ask questions of their own, and talk to really a pre-recorded native speaker in a conversation. So it's my favorite part of the student experience, I always say. So I always like to make sure I get a chance to demo that.
Eating.
And for the milestone, students will see a series of pictures slide automatically across their screen. This is just setting up their place in the story, and they're moving automatically. I'm not controlling the pictures.
Hello.
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 Do you have a dog?
Yes, I have a dog.
Yes, I have a dog.
So now it wants me to ask a question, right? And I have their answer. I see I am reading, right? So I need to ask something that'll fit that context here. What are you doing?
What are you doing?
Right. Like I said, this is my favorite part of the student experience because it allows students to synthesize all of the phrases that they've practiced up until this point. So this is a summative at the very end of the unit. And by the time students get to this activity, they'll have logged in 8 to 10 learning hours in the program. So don't worry if you're looking at this and thinking, well, how will my students know to say this? Don't worry, all of these phrases are things that they'll have practiced countless times over up until this point. Does anyone have any questions so far about anything we've seen so far from the student experience? Okay, all right. Well, then let me know if you do. I want to also show you, again, like I said, when students first enter in the program, they are brought to Unit 1, Lesson 1. However, not everyone, of course, needs to something just fell, pardon that. Not everyone needs to begin at Unit 1, Lesson 1, right? So especially if you know students have more experience in the language, or even you want to set aside some activities for whole class or small group instruction that use a higher level, you certainly can do that. And here's how. If I click on this icon over here that says Show Menu, I open up the entire unit menu here that's available for my students. So it shows all of the units and includes a short description of each unit theme here. Each row that you see here is considered one level of language learning. So Rosetta Stone's American English curriculum here has 5 levels. Our Spanish Latin America curriculum also has 5 levels. And here's how these levels sort of build upon one another. The units in level 1 are all about building that foundation for fundamental vocabulary and essential language structures. Then we start to snowball. So now the units in level 2 allow students to navigate their surroundings as they build on the vocab and language structures that we developed previously. Level 3 is allowing students to connect more with the world around them and really build on conversation skills now. Level 4 and level 5, we start to get a lot more niche, a lot kind of more real life, real world specific in our topics. But level 4 is about giving opportunities to increase understanding of the language. And level 5 is really about developing the command of English or Spanish as they reinforce these crucial communication skills. Although we recommend students proceed through these levels and units and lessons in order, you can also select any level, like I said, as a starting point for students with more experience in the language, or you can direct small groups or whole class to work in a specific unit based on your lesson plans or based on your curriculum. And to better help you choose where a student might start, or to help you to find specific activities for whole class implementation, Rosetta Stone also provides teachers with this scope and sequence document over here that just outlines the content that's covered in each of the units. So here's what that scope and sequence looks like, and I'll show you how to access this later in this session. Each unit is listed with the 4 lessons, so lesson 1, lesson 2, 3, 4, and the milestone. And we provide exactly what vocabulary, core concepts, and grammar topics that students will encounter throughout each lesson. So I could scroll down if I want to view higher units and align my lesson plans or curriculum map with the Rosetta Stone scope and sequence here. If you know a student's learning history or have scores based on a diagnostic test or a proficiency assignment, you can use this scope and sequence guide as well to kind of help you determine where you want them to start. Likewise, based on your lesson plans or your students' language needs, you can also direct students to a specific activity to engage with, very particular vocabulary or grammar concepts. So for example, let's say you really want your students to learn how to ask friends to make plans with one another, right? So using the scope and sequence, I can actually see that vocabulary and grammar specific to friends and social life are right here in Unit 7. And let's even say I wanted them to specifically practice, how to accept or decline invitations. I can see that that is very specific, but it happens to be covered here in Unit 7, Lesson 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So then maybe just for, the week that I wanted my students to practice this, I could direct them all and say, okay, everyone, just for this week, please click into Unit 7, Lesson 4. And even though they were temporarily jumping ahead, right, you could still feel confident that they were getting the structured, very targeted practice instruction that they needed. And as we kind of just saw earlier, this is the same layout that students are already familiar with here. So they'll have some background or schema on how to navigate through this, even though they've temporarily jumped to a higher level here. Likewise, based on your lesson plans or activity, you can also direct students to like a specific activity to prepare for a project as well. So for example, let's say you really want your students to do a project on dining out at a restaurant. You could split your class into groups of 3 and have them write a short little skit or dialogue with, 2 diners and 1 server in a restaurant setting. And then looking here, I can see that actually dining and vacation vocabulary are covered exactly in Unit 8, Lesson 1. It says food and restaurant language, right? So then again, just as before, maybe just for the week or those 2 weeks that I wanted my students to work on restaurant vocabulary, I could instruct them all to, again, click into Unit 8 here to get that very targeted practice. So now that we've seen how students can experience and navigate through these different units and lessons, I also am really excited to share one last learning opportunity that you and your students have access to in the Foundations platform. I'm going to click on this tab up here that says Explore All Content. And I want to show you our Stories feature that's right here. So Rosetta Stone also comes with a library of stories for you and your students to have access to. And the other great thing about the stories that I like to highlight is these are all aligned to whatever unit your student is working in at the moment, right? So I can scroll down and see stories that match whatever unit my student could be working in. I could click on the number up atop and jump there automatically. But let's say my students are clicking into this passage here, The Boy from Hana. I'm given another microphone check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The stories section here offers 3 different levels of engagement for students. So you can see the tabs at the top. There's read, listen, and speak. For the read tab here, I just have a traditional passage that I can read. Some of these vocab words are in blue. That means these are words where if I hover my mouse over, I'll get a visual support. So I'll see an image showing me what this word means. The second option is the listen tab. So for this, I can press the play button and listen to a pre-recorded native speaker reading the passage to me.
The Boy from Hana. Hana, Hawaii has a big forest. It has big green trees and flowers.
Right. And you'll notice as well that I get this additional support where the words and the lines are being highlighted for me. This is really great for students as well because it helps them more easily follow along and read in their head as they're listening. And then finally, the speak tab. This is really the most rigorous activity of the story section, but this is where students can record themselves reading, and then they can get automatic feedback on their fluency and pronunciation, and they can listen to themselves as well. The Boy from Hana. Hana, Hawaii has a big forest. And I want to show you, if I had finished this, it would have given me, feedback on all of these words. And this is what that could have looked like. So this is sort of the breakdown of what the feedback means. A vertical gray bar means there was a pause detected in my speech. A red word means I mispronounced this word here. A gray word means I skipped over it entirely or I just didn't say it. And then remember, the black and the blue words are just the normal words from the passage. There we go. Don't worry, you don't need to kind of memorize what these mean. The key will always be here on the screen for you if you just click on this little question mark up here. Teachers make use of the speaking feature and of the stories feature here in a number of different ways. So actually what I used to do as kind of a final speaking assessment, every few weeks or so, I would have students record a passage of their choice, and then I'd have them get into small groups or get with a partner and press play and share their recording with their partner. The Boy from Hana, right? So that way I can ensure that they were able to demonstrate their growing pronunciation and fluency while still gaining that confidence in speaking the new language in front of others. Kind of as another teacher tip for an idea, you could also just partner students up to have them read, identify known vocabulary here, or even just share their opinions based on the text. In terms of motivation and engagement for students, the good news is that Rosetta Stone is designed intentionally to be a very engaging language learning experience for them. So we always want students to be inspired to take ownership of their own learning. And one of the ways that we do that is we try to mark their achievements through something called stamps in the program. So if I click on my name again up here in the right and click my achievements, I'm brought to all of the stamps that I've collected in this language. Stamps can be earned for a number of different benchmarks. They could be things like being a frequent user, using Rosetta Stone for a consecutive number of days, or for mastering different vocabulary topics. And the vocabulary topics can get super, super specific: patron of the arts, movies, emergencies, family members, etc. I can also click category over here if I want to see these alphabetically, so it's easier to find. But many teachers choose to incorporate these stamps as well in a number of different ways. So that could mean that you're creating some kind of a tracker chart that celebrates student engagement. I always recommend connecting this to a real incentive system you have in your classroom. So of course, that depends on the age of your students, of what would motivate them. When I was using this with my 8th graders, if a student earned a stamp, I would add, 5 to 10 bonus points to the lowest grade in the grade book. So anything that connects to their interests and whatever drives and motivates them is always going to be a powerful thing for engagement and buy-in. Now, does anyone have any more questions, I guess, about the student experience? Because after this, we're going to pivot and turn our attention to the teacher side. Okay, awesome. So now that we have this strong understanding of what your students will experience as they work in Rosetta Stone, I want to turn our attention to your experience as a teacher. As a Rosetta Stone teacher, you can always modify student account settings to best suit your students' needs and view reports that will provide insights on your students' progress. So when you sign into Rosetta Stone here, you're going to begin by clicking where it says Launch Administrator Tools. And then from your administrator account here, there we go, you can navigate to various different tools that will help you to support your students using this navigation bar up at the top. Today, we're just going to focus on 2 things. We're going to focus on the Learners tab and the Reports tab. First, let's take a look at Learners. So when you access Rosetta Stone Administrator Tools, Learners is where you'll land. This tab is the jumping off point to view and manage your students' accounts. To see a list of all of your students, you would double click on All Learners I Can See. And from here, you can make changes to a student's registration as needed. So I could double click on a student's name and view their profile. I'll use my own as an example. If you double click on a student's name, just as I did, you open up their learner details. And now there's a lot of data that you can view and edit here. So I just want to point out a couple of key things. First, of course, is their learning language. It's likely that your administrator will have already assigned this when they created student accounts. But if there was a mistake and you needed to make a change, you would just do that right here, okay? The second option is the interface language, right? So this is the language in which the instructions and the navigation prompts appear. It's super, super helpful for students learning a new language to have this interface language set to their native or home language, right? So for example, if I had a native Spanish speaker in my ELL class, I would absolutely change their interface to Spanish. And then that way I could make sure they were really more confident in navigating through the program so they could still focus on learning English in the activity itself. The other thing I want you to sort of think about in terms of customizations to the student experience is their curriculum mode. So if you can see in this curricula box down here, I can see for each of these levels, so English American level 1, level 2, 3, 4, 5. In the center, it says in blue, the curriculum is standard. So standard, standard, standard for all of them. Standard is the default curriculum setting that all students are placed in when they first are registered in the program. Standard essentially means that there is a balance between the amount of reading, writing, speaking, and listening questions. We say that this is optimized for efficient learning of content and skills. However, if you ever want to modify this for your students' learning experience, you can, and that's very easy to do. You would just click over here where it says change, and you'd uncheck the box here that says use default curriculum. And now you're able to click into different curriculum modes for your students if you want. So in addition to standard, we also have standard with reading intro. So this is standard with just some additional support in teaching characters and their sounds. Extended, which is the most advanced option that we have. Extended just gives additional practice. Extended with the reading intro, so extended with extra reading. Then if you want your students to have a focus just on reading and writing skills, we have a reading and writing focus. Reading and writing with intro, so that's reading and writing with extra reading. And then finally, we offer speaking and listening focus. So if you really want your students to just get a focus in these skills, you could have that option as well for them. Does anyone have any questions about these curriculum options? Okay, awesome. If you were happy with your settings here, you would just click apply, but I'll click cancel. And then your students would be ready to go in Rosetta Stone. Now that you have this understanding of how to verify your student account settings here, the other aspect of the admin experience I want to introduce is reporting. So again, to access your reports, I'm going to click on reports up here in the navigation bar. And the administrator reports allow you to track your students' usage, overall scores, and progress percentages. There's a whole lot of data here. So today I just want to focus on only one of our reports that will be particularly helpful as you begin to implement Rosetta Stone in your classroom. And that report is the usage report over here on the far right. The usage report is super helpful for getting a high-level view of what your class has been up to in Rosetta. To view that usage report, I'm just going to click where it says begin, and then select the group or class whose data I'd like to view here in the upper left, and I double click. And then after you've selected the group you're interested in, you can view some data about their learning at the bottom of the page here. So across the bottom of the report, there's this large box that breaks down usage by individual student and their individual level they're working in at the time. For each of these students, I can view and sort by what language level they're currently working in, their last activity date. So I can see the most recent login to the most distant login. I'm also able to see their score that they have so far. Keep in mind, this is not the score of the entire program. This is just the score of this level over here. So if it says 100% here for Liz, that doesn't mean she's 100% complete. It just means of everything she's answered in level 1, she's earned a 100. The next column is progress. So this is the percentage that the student is complete with that level. So this is actually my Korean account, and you can see that I'm 12% complete in Korean level 1 here. Training use, this is the hours and minutes that the student has spent answering questions in the program. So Phyllis here has spent 5 hours and 16 minutes answering questions in Spanish Latin American. For stories use, this is the hours and minutes the student has spent in that stories section I showed you. So Liz has actually spent 3 hours and 49 minutes in the story section for English level 2. Remember, that could be reading, listening, or speaking. And then don't worry about the coaching use section over here. So coaching use refers to when a district has purchased the license for our live coaching. So this will remain on 0 hours and 0 minutes. So don't even worry about this over here. Some teachers also like to schedule getting this usage report sent automatically to their email inbox, and that's very easy to do. So if you ever want to get this automatically sent to you, you would just click back on the reports tab, and you would click schedule here to set it up how you want it. The usage report, like I said, is really an excellent place to begin diving into data on Rosetta Stone. In addition to your administrator report that we just looked at very briefly today, your students can also run a report of their own usage in Rosetta Stone. I hope I get to share more about the student and teacher reports in our next session, which is titled Engage 2, Propel Language Learning with Teacher Reports. Does anyone have any questions about the reports feature we've seen? Okay, then I'm also going to show you now other additional resources that are offered to you to help kind of extend and enhance your implementation. To access these different teacher resources, you can click on the help button up here in the upper right. And this brings me to the Rosetta Stone support site, which is also just handy to know. But if I click on the K through 12 tab, then over here where it says training and resources, I'm going to click teacher resources. And this is our collection of pre-made teacher resources available to you. I'll actually put this link in the chat box for you, so it's easier for you to access. There we go. So I've just put this link in the chat, but I really recommend you bookmarking this. Again, as you can see, I have to your device. I have resources organized. First, my general resources. So these are applicable to you no matter what language your students are learning. And then I have some that are language specific for your English or for your Spanish learners. I'll click into general first. So this opens up, I have different classroom activity guides. So this is full of different activities that you can do in the classroom with your students of all ages, really. But these are things that will have a time, a learning objective, materials needed, and a brief procedure. And these are things that can be warm-ups, exit tickets, rotations in centers, review games, what have you. Going back to my general resources. So I have just some additional kind of headset setup information. Here's that scope and sequence document I showed you all in the beginning. So this is where you could find this to download this. We also provide these image cards. So these are all of the pictures that appear in the student questions. And you can use these to create word walls. You can print them out and have students get into conversation practice using these. I used to print them out and have students write on the back, one observation, one inference, one question they had about what they saw. Or you can give students 3 random cards without any context and ask them to write a creative story or write a paragraph about what they think is going on. So there's a number of different ways you can be super, super creative in extending the learning using these image cards. Back in my resources. I want to also show you some resources that are available for your students who are learning English and those who are learning Spanish. I'll click into English first. So for your English learners, we also provide different pre-made teacher guides. So these are really detailed lesson plans. These are also aligned to Bloom's taxonomy. We have some placement information, pre-made tests and answer keys. These also come with audio files, workbook pages and answer keys, quizzes as well embedded, flashcards, memory card games, unit reading exercises. So these are the same stories that appear in the story section, but now they also come with different comprehension questions, and they can be printed out and shared. Even more readings. So these are focused readings in folk tales, narratives and poems, argumentative essays, biographies, reported speeches, historical documents. So we get some cross-curricular support with social studies here as well. Even more storybooks and audio files. So for these stories, we're also giving students access to writing prompts, comprehension quizzes, audio files, and answer keys. Again, these are the resources made for English learners specifically. If I go back and look at my resources targeting my learners of Spanish, I can see even more as well. For my learners in Spanish, there are flashcards, memory card games, unit reading exercises, storybooks. On the other screen as well, teacher guides, tests, workbooks, etc. The program is being updated all the time. So actually the images that you see in the questions are a bit old and they will be updated within the month. I will say this resource right here in the, where did it go? Here we go. This resource right here, for example, this Rosetta Stone Foundations and Placement Guide, this was added about 1 week ago, maybe a week and a half ago. So, I mean, this is being updated all the time. Like I said, images are being updated currently and should be finished in about this month. Okay. Does anyone have any other questions about the resources you see? Okay. All right then. So now kind of moving forward that you understand this student and the teacher experience on Rosetta Stone, we can finish our time together by talking about some best practices for implementing Rosetta Stone in the classroom. There are many, many different ways that this fits into your daily instruction. Some teachers like to use Rosetta Stone as part of a flipped classroom model where students are working in Rosetta Stone independently at home, and then the teachers can use class time to engage the students in additional activities or use some of those supplemental materials. Rosetta Stone is also a really great resource to use during rotations or centers. So for example, at one center, students could be working independently on a lesson or activity. At another, students are working with a partner to have conversations. At another, they're reading and recording themselves in the stories. At another center, you could be giving, targeted small group instruction. Additionally, if you also want to assess your students' progress, you can also give the Rosetta Stone supplemental tests, either as a formative or a summative assessment for them. And in terms of recommended usage, As a best practice, if you look really for your older learners, I mean, your students I know will be adult learners, so I would look in this section, but I recommend somewhere around the 30-minute mark as when I suggest students take a break from the program. That doesn't mean they have to stop learning in Rosetta Stone. I like to think of it as, by the time they get to the 30-minute mark, have them pivot and switch into one of the supplemental materials or one of the teacher resources. And in addition to a computer or a mobile device, you'll want your students to have access to a headset to optimize their ability to participate in the speech recognition activities. So we found that a headset is the best option, but earbuds with a microphone will also work well, or AirPods, because they have embedded microphones, also work just as well. If your students are working in a larger classroom or group setting, you'll want to make sure that there's a bit of space between your students so that they're not picking up sounds from each other's mics. And we've been using the browser-based version of Rosetta Stone in our demo today. But Rosetta Stone is used just as much on tablets and mobile devices. So our app is completely free to download and allows much of the same immersive experience, just with a touch screen functionality. To set up that mobile access, students only need to sign in one time, but they would sign in with their same username, password, and when it says namespace, it's the first part of the URL. I like to highlight the app specifically because it allows students to access their language lessons from anywhere at any time, even when they don't have internet access, because there's an offline mode. So this is a great option for students who do not have internet access at home, of course. They can always download the lesson to their device at school, and then they can access that lesson in offline mode from home or wherever at any time. The other great thing about this too is that it'll always automatically update their progress. So by the time they come back to the internet, it'll be like they never left. All right, so I hope that you've all enjoyed today's professional learning session. We've explored what makes the Rosetta Stone learning experience so special and discussed how you as a teacher can help support your student success. I really hope that you and your students will enjoy immersing yourselves in language with Rosetta Stone. And gracias, merci, danke schön, shukran, shishi, and thank you for spending all of your time with me today. I do ask that you please take a very brief moment to fill out this survey that I have here, and I'll put this in the chat as well. There it is. I appreciate getting your honest feedback here. It helps me be better and it helps us perfect our PD sessions in our program. I've also added the contact information to best reach me, as well as contact to reach technical support should you ever need them. And again, if you haven't written these down, feel free to do so. And please, please feel free to reach out at any time.
Thank you so much.